Dear students, this is me, Dr. Shikha Sharma, lecturer in English at Government Girls College, B.A. Students, in my previous videos, I have discussed first three stanzas of the poem and Marvell's poem Thoughts in a Garden. Now, come to the fifth stanza. What a wondrous life in this islet! Ripe apples drop about my head. The luscious clusters of the vine upon my mouth do crush their wine. The nectarine and curious peach into my hands themselves do reach. Stumbling on melons as I pass, and snared with flowers, I fall on grass. In this stanza, the poet gives a lovely description of a garden with fruits. This stanza is a very beautiful example of sensuousness. The poet is sitting in a garden and his senses are filled with happiness. He draws a very sensuous picture of the pleasures of the fruit garden in its exuberance, where life for him is full of joy and wonder. What a wondrous life in this I lead. Ripe apples drop about my head. The poet says that he is having a wonderful time in this garden. Ripe apples hang downwards from the tree so as to touch his head. He is surrounded by the ripe apples. The luscious clusters of the vine upon my mouth do crush their wine. The bunches of juicy and delicious grapes growing on the creepers or vines come into such close contact with his lips. The abundance of these grapes attract him, and the juicy the juice enters his mouth as clusters of the wine crush their wine upon his mouth, and they seem eager to be eaten. The nectarine and curious peach into my hands themselves do reach. The nectarine. What is nectarine? Nectarine is a kind of a fruit. The nectarines and the exquisitely formed peaches come into his hands of their own accord. He does not many he doesn't make any efforts for getting these fruits. Okay? The nectarine and peach fall in the poet's hand in a curious manner. Stumbling on melons as I pass, and snared with flowers, I fall on grass. Ensnared means entrapped, entangled. Stumbling on melons. The melons grow on the ground in such plenty that as the poet walks, his feet strike against these melons and he stumbles and falls on the ground. He is entrapped by the fruits and flowers in the garden. The pleasure that nature offers him in a garden is really very great. What wondrous life in these I lead. Ripe apples drop about my head. The luscious clusters of the vine upon my mouth do crush their wine. The nectarine and curious peach into my hands themselves do reach. Stumbling on melons as I pass, and snared with flowers, I fall on grass. This stanza is a very beautiful example of sensuousness. The poet is calmly sitting in a garden, okay, and his senses are on active mode. Okay, his senses are filled with happiness. He can feel, okay, he can feel the presence of these things. Okay, as he thinks about the picture, actually when this thing, actually he is attracted by the scene and the scene of this garden. He draws a very sensuous picture of the pleasures of the fruit garden in its exuberance, where life for him is full of joy and wonder. He is very happy in a garden. He is in a state of happiness while he is sitting in a garden. He says that he is having a wonderful life in this garden. He's living, he's standing, he's sitting, okay, he's walking in a beautiful garden, in a beautiful or natural place on the earth. Ripe apples hang downwards from the tree so as to touch his head. He's surrounded by the apples, by the ripe apples. The abundance of apples attract him. There are exuberance of apple in the garden. The bunches of juicy and pulpy and delicious grapes growing on the vines come into such close contact with his lips, and as they seem eager to be eaten. Okay, the abundance of these grapes attract him. Okay, their juice enters his mouth as clusters of the wine crush their wine upon his mouth. The nectarines, okay, the fruit, okay, the nectarines and the exquisitely formed peaches come to his hand automatically. Okay, they fall from the tree and come into his hands of their own accord. He doesn't make any effort for getting these fruits. They automatically come into his hand as they fall. They are ripe apples or they are ripe fruits, so they, when they ripe, they automatically fall down and they come into his hand. After getting ripened, they come into his hand. They fall from the tree and come into his hand. The nectarine and peach fall in the poet's hand in a curious manner. In a curious manner, it means they are eager. They seem eager to be eaten. They are ripe now. Okay, so they seem to be eaten, and they seem too curious to be eaten. And there is also plenty of ripe melons. Okay, the melons grow on the ground in such plenty that the poet, as the poet walks, okay, his feet strike against them. There are plenty, abundance of melons, okay, as on in the ground or on the ground in the garden. When he walks, okay, as he walks, his feet strike against them, okay, against a melon, and as his feet strike against the melon, he stumbles. Okay, he stumbles and falls on the ground. He loses his balance and he falls on the ground. Such is the beauty of the garden. Such is the beauty of fruits and flowers in the garden. Such is the abundance, plenty of the fruits and the beauty of the flowers in the garden. And it gives delight and pleasure to the poet. He feels happy when he is in the garden. He is in a natural place and he feels very fortunate. He feels fortunate enough that he is fortunate enough to have such a wonderful place or have such a wonderful time in the lap of nature, where nature provides him all kinds of fruits and all kinds of things which gives him pleasure and delight. The pleasure that nature offers him in a garden is of really very importance. Okay, this stanza is an example of sensuousness. We feel sensuousness. What is sensuousness? Okay, actually, sensuousness is a quality in poetry which affects the senses. Okay, which affects the senses. A sensuous poet uses the word pictures that help the reader to understand the sights and sounds expressed or suggested in a poem. Okay, what is sensuousness? A sensuous poet uses the word pictures that help the reader to understand the sights and sounds expressed or suggested in a poem. Now, there are five senses. Okay, five senses: visual, auditory, olfactory, gustatory, and tactile. Visual. What is visual? Visual means sense of see. Okay. Auditory, sense of hearing. Olfactory, sense of smell. Gustatory, sense of taste. Tactile, sense of touch. Okay. Sensuousness is a quality in poetry which affects the senses. Okay, it means when a reader, okay, when a reader reads this poem, it means when if I read this poem, when we read this poem, the scene of the garden comes before our eyes. Okay, while reading the poem, the scene of then we are reading the poem about a garden, about the scene and situation of garden, about the natural place of, just like a garden. So when we read the poem, the picture or the scene of the garden comes before our eyes. It is called visual sensuousness. Okay, it is an example of visual sensuousness. Now next, when the poet talks about the fruits, the juicy and delicious fruits, when he talks about the juicy, pulpy and delicious fruits, we begin to feel the taste of the fruits. It is called it is called gustatory, because the taste of the fruit come into our mouth, or the gustatory senses are active. Okay, and then when we feel that really the fruits, the apple, the peaches, nectarine, these fruits are coming into our mouth, and the juice of these fruits are, we begin to feel the taste of the juice or the taste of the fruit. So it is called gustatory sense. Sense of taste. Gustatory sensuousness means sense of taste.